Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Federico Hernandez, and welcome to Savvy.co. I'm super excited to be here. I usually don't talk about whiskey. I usually specialize in rum, but Lou made me. He's like, Federico, you better start drinking whiskey if you want to get closer to enlightenment. But I'm like, okay, I'm gonna do this. Okay, so here I am. Anyways, welcome to the Sip of Knowledge with Lou and Liz, who are your hosts, and they actually have a magnificent new guest, which is Becky Harris. She's the president and head distiller at, here I go, Catoctin Distillery. Catoctin Creek Distilling.
Yes, you got it.
Ooh, yeah, all right.
Yeah.
If you're here for the first time or you're watching us right now through YouTube, Facebook, come over to Savvy, which is CAVVY.co, where you can participate from all our like activations and our chat box. And I see already a couple people getting. Of course Liz is sending it, and then Brad. But we got 21 people. Come on, start saying where you're visiting us from. Let us know a little bit about yourself. Anyways, I'm done. I'm leaving. I leave you guys in great hands. And let the education begin. Bye, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, Federico. My guest, I go. Is that right, Liz? Okay. All right. Welcome to this edition of A Sip of Knowledge. We do have Becky Harris from Catoctin Creek Distilling today. I am Lou Bryson. I am a whiskey writer. I've got oh wow, the green screen doesn't do really well. There we go. Yeah. So I've got those two books going. I am no longer a senior drinks writer for the Daily Beast because they've shut down their food and drink section. So I'm back on the streets. I know, what the heck, guys. But I just got an assignment yesterday, and then I just got another one just about 40 minutes ago. So I think I'll be fine. Yes. Today, what am I drinking? I'm drinking Catoctin Creek. Becky very kindly sent us 3 samples of their rye whiskey. One of Liz's broke. It's so sad.
And the test proof one too. I'm sorry.
I know, of all the ones to bring. And that's it for me. Liz, what do you got?
Awesome. Thanks, Lou. As you can see, I am on the road today. Safety first, as always. I'm Liz Rhoades, a technical distiller and spirit consultant. Have over a decade experience in alcoholic beverage, spanning across several different sites, product and spirit types, including beer, rum, vodka. But sorry, Federico, my favorite, of course, is whiskey. No contest there. I spent
that brought it back.
Easy. I'm starting to sweat here. Way easy.
I did spend most of my career at a tiny little mom and pop shop known as Diageo, but am currently founder and principal at Spirit Safe Consulting, as well as director of whiskey ops and R&D at the one and only Whistle Pig Whiskey. So thanks for joining, everyone. And Becky, thanks for joining us today.
So excited.
So yeah, Becky Harris is our guest today. She is as I mentioned, she is the president and chief distiller and co-founder of Catoctin Creek Distilling Company in Purcellville, Virginia. And today I learned that Purcellville is northwest of DC, out in Virginia wine country. She is a chemical engineer by training, worked in industry before starting up Catoctin Creek with her husband, Scott. You started distilling 13 years ago last month. Is that right?
Gosh, is that what it is?
Yeah.
2000. It feels like a million years.
I'll bet.
Especially after the last 3.
You're doing other stuff as well. You're the current president at ACSA?
Yes, that's right. I am current president of ACSA, which has been a wild ride. I took over right after the pandemic started.
Yeah, well, that's been a fun time. Yeah, I mean, we'll get into that. We'll get into that whole thing. you're also the secretary and board member of the Step Up Foundation, the ASA's group aimed at increasing diversity, inclusion, and equity in the craft spirits industry. So
yes,
we'll
excited about
talk
that
about
project
that
as well. With Diageo's support, as well as Bacardi has also come on as a supporter, which has been amazing. Yes. And if anybody else out there has a lot of money,
right, feel free to jump in.
You can slide into my DMs.
So our first question is always, how did you get here? You don't have to go back to elementary school, unless it's really pertinent.
In
but
the mists of time.
I know that feeling. Tell us how you got to where you are.
Well, it started when Scott likes to say that government contracting taught him a great love of drinking. And he had hit the point in his career where he was looking for something different. He likes to say it was the, doing the 10th revision on a PowerPoint set of slides that for a project he knew they weren't going to get the bid on. And it's just you're spinning your wheels and you're wondering, why am I doing this? And he was daydreaming about we had visited Bushmills in Ireland a few years before. And he just kind of got this itch and came to me and, was like, this is what I want to do. And I'm like, well, how about you write a business plan? Aha, okay. That you serious? You got to write a business plan. So I figured, well, maybe that would be that. And for a while, it was pretty. He did start doing it and almost talked himself out of it. But then he, kind of figured out how to pare it down. At that point in 2009, there were maybe 200 distilleries in the U.S. There weren't very many little tiny mom and pops like we see now. And the whole, distillery pub kind of model and all those things were just, way out in the future. So he kind of, pivoted a little bit. And then, we looked at, okay, well, we'll see what the bank says. And we got an SBA loan. And so.
Oh, wow. They said yes right away.
They did. They said yes.
Business plan.
Yeah. And with everything we owned, right?
Of course.
Of course.
Well, I'm sure your experience didn't hurt either.
No, I think, the fact that he had, being a government contractor, he had been essentially running a, $1 to $2 million a year business, as that was the size of the contract he was working. I had worked for companies that did polystyrene foam, contact lens manufacturing, copper and nickel plating on plastic. So, it wasn't, I was like, I can figure this out. Can we make money? And,
seriously, if guys can do this in the woods in Scotland, you can probably handle it.
I can figure this out. I can learn it. And, but the question was, can we make money? And that was the real question, is how do you do that? And it's still a question, for a lot of folks right now. And I talk to people all the time coming in and I'm like, they always ask me for advice. And I'm like, I started this 10 years ago. I don't even know now how to start anymore.
A whole different thing.
It's a whole different thing. We were one of maybe 6 distilleries. We were the local distillery in DC.
Oh, right.
We were the only local whiskey.
And now there's what, like 5 or 6 distilleries in the district now.
Yeah, right? Easy, right?
Yeah.
Easy. And we didn't know about branding. I mean, our branding was crap. It was. Ouch. Right away. I mean, Scott would say it himself. He would say our first set of labels, he had made them. And, it was like, we didn't hire anybody to really give it a strong look and feel, but we were kind of like a couple of engineers figuring it out. And, we've come a long way. Now we got professionals to help us with some of this stuff, but it was, it was a very different time. And so that's kind of where we kicked off. Our focus has always been kind of rye and the story of rye. But we also do brandies, mostly really small amounts for the local market, apple, pear, peach, and Virginia grape brandy, as well as a gin.
So just circling back on your background as a chemical engineer, and you mentioned your experience was in non-food.
Yep.
How did that...
Contact lenses are kind of related. It's not far off because it's all, the pharmaceutical kind of thing. So it wasn't like totally different.
So I guess, the question there how did that background prepare you for craft distilling, and what were some of the biggest challenges along the way with Bev Elk?
Mostly it was just trying to get to a point where, one of the things, because we were early and small and really lone in our little individual market, it was just really trying to get the space and time to create the flavor profile that I really wanted, which is more like what I'm doing now, as opposed to what I did the first 6 months when we're just, Virginia ABC says, we'll take your whiskey. And we're like, okay.
Now we have to.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to figure out how I make this taste good. And it's going to get out the door. And, and we did. It was very young, but, it always tasted good as far as I was concerned, because that was the thing was I'm not going to put anything out that I won't drink. And
your new make impressed me the very first time I tasted it.
Oh, thank you.
And I tasted it pretty darn early at I think it was Whiskey Fest New York, and there were a lot of really nasty unaged whiskeys out there. Yours was never one of them. It was impressive.
I have to say that rye, gives us that more than a lot of other grains. I think rye is so pretty.
I noticed that you make your gin from rye as well.
Right. It just, I think that flavor really kind of just resonates with me personally. And it does kind of not needs quite so much time in the barrel to really get to be.
Most definitely.
Yeah. I think, corn for me has always had, it just takes more time.
Needs more time.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Much more time. Yeah.
So is that
I've always thought that, sorry, go ahead. No, mine's really short, so I'll just go ahead and say it. The rye gin, I've always thought of the rye as kind of like the secret plus one botanical in
it's got it's a softness, I think. Yeah. For me, it comes as a softness rather than a spice really in that gin, just the way.
That's all I had, Liz.
Go, Liz.
Oh, I was just going to ask, how you arrived to rye. Rye.
It's so cool because when you look at, and this is, one of the things about, the history stuff is when you look at what was being done, it just was east of the Appalachians, rye was the stuff. And it was and so we looked at it, and at first it was like, oh, maybe we could do some other things, but we really focused in on the rye because at that time there were very few grained glass ryes. We were always grained glass, and most people were not. Most people were sourcing and merchant bottling. Great. I mean, it's great. But what it was our flavor was so different because we were doing it from grain that I kept getting people saying it doesn't taste like rye. And it's like, what I said I swear it was like the first 8 years, I would be like, when there are enough ryes coming out where people are doing it grain to glass, you're going to find out that rye is just as interesting as single malt, just as interesting as bourbon, as anything else you want to see, because you're going to get that variety of flavors.
Yeah.
I mean, now you can taste, you go taste Corbin Cash. It tastes totally different than my stuff, which is totally different. It's so nice, than far north up in Minnesota. I love rye, and that's what I always go and taste.
Yeah. To your point, rye is extremely versatile. And I think that's, what makes it so interesting. But yeah, to your point, like, if I think about all the different varietals, 30 or so across the US and Canada that are being explored and used, and not only varietals, but that's just the first step. But there's so many processing conditions after that really can affect the flavor profile.
100%.
And it's great that there has been sort of this big exploration in the rye space, because the category is expanding and consumers are being educated about the magnificentness of rye, if that's a word. It's not a word.
It is. It's gorgeous.
Absolutely.
You have the ryes that grow up in the northern or in the Midwest are not the same ones that do well in Virginia. We have a totally different, massive humidity, and it's low. Where most of our rye comes from is right near the Tidewater region, right near the Rappahannock River, and it's low-lying ground. It is humid as heck. And, and when I have Timmy come up, and we talk and make plans for the year, it's well, we'll try this varietal. And how did it do for him? Because if it doesn't do good for him, it's not a winner. So it really has to be something that grows, that he can make money, pay his bills with, so that I can, we have a partnership. So that partnership has been really key for me in the past probably 5 years since we really locked in this partnership with Timmy. That's been a really big deal. And so, we've messed with some Ryman, we've messed with Brissetto, we've messed with, it's funny now, there's so much discussion over the specifics, but what I always liked is using it in a blend of ryes as opposed to a single varietal expression. Okay. So it's 100% rye, but it's some of it I get from Pennsylvania, some of it I get from Virginia. And so it kind of, I'm pre-mash billing it, but it's all 100% rye.
So that was something I was going to ask. Is it a 100% rye mash bill?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So that was, I just had Sam Kamlenik on the last show talking about Pennsylvania rye, Monongahela rye.
Yes.
So is there a Virginia rye historically, or I don't know?
Well, this is where I get nerdy, is because Virginia, when you look at the time, when we talked about the history that we're inspired by, it wasn't when
we really like nerdy on here, by the way. I just wanted to
so
am I right, Liz? This is our beat. This is what we do.
Well, it's like when you look at the 1800s, like 1830s to 1900, everything was getting big, right? These rye distilleries were getting to be industrial size. But when you look at from from colonial times up to, say, the turn of the century around 1800, in 1776, there were 13,000 distilleries in the 18 states. There were 3,000 distilleries in Virginia. The average production was 1,500 gallons.
Okay.
So you're looking at a ton of little places, right? And nobody has samples of this stuff to be passing around at whiskey shows anymore, but this was the stuff. And the change in the industry happened incredibly quickly, because if you look at the 13,000 distilleries, so in New York, for instance, I forget the exact timing. I'm trying to pull this out of very full memory banks, but it was like, I believe there were in New York in like 1810, there were like 500 distilleries, and I think by 1830 they were down to like below 200, and those are pretty close. And they were making 6 times as much whiskey because all the little guys were getting squeezed out. Because the invention of the beer still and the increasing industrialization in that sector was just taking out all these small distilleries. They couldn't compete anymore.
I would assume in New York, the Erie Canal had something to do with that as well.
I'm sure transportation,
get grain
right?
to market easier. Yeah, you don't have to distill it.
transportation was a big deal. That's a lot of reason why, a lot of things moved to Kentucky is because you didn't have to contend with the traveling over the mountains.
Mm-hmm.
And which was cheaper to move stuff around, cheaper to move grain, your costs of transportation. As we switched from predominantly rye mash bills to predominantly corn mash bills, it's because it was so much cheaper to get corn in the Ohio River Valley and west than it was to get corn over the mountain from there. Yeah. And so that was another one of the forces that just kind of led to the decline of rye, with prohibition essentially being a death knell for so much. But that's really what I was kind of excited about. And if you look at the time before we were highly industrialized, so in the 1700s, the people that were distilling were mostly women and enslaved people. Why? Because there was so much tobacco being grown, and tobacco is highly labor intensive. So most of the men were out there in the fields working. And so making the spirits, making the cider, beer, whatever it was going to be, is something that's just another chore for the women and, any enslaved people that were there if their place was big enough for it. So that was really kind of when it became much more industrialized, it then became much more men's work. So about the time when you hit, George Washington's distillery was the biggest one, right? In 1776. And if you go visit it, you're like, wow, this isn't really tremendously big. But they made 100,000 gallons a year. So they were working real hard. But that was a much bigger distillery than what most of those people were doing. So most of those people were doing it seasonally, right? It's a way to preserve your grain, to preserve your fruits, things like that, and trade. So anyway, I think that's really cool. And we I
still see that in Europe. There's a whole lot of distilleries in Germany, but they're so
tiny distilleries.
Yeah.
Like
and 3 and 5 barrels a year.
Yeah, shouldn't work, but it does, right? Because their laws are different for that and make it easier. There's not really a good way for in America for most folks to do like just seasonal,
a small
little bit of this. You have to kind of make it a business to make it worth doing.
Yeah, the entry costs are so much. You've got to be.
Yeah, reporting, all that stuff. It just becomes much more complicated. And it's probably going to get more complicated yet as we continue to grow. I mean, more small distilleries, right? Then it just gets more regulatory attention and costs start going up.
Wow, there's a really nice note there on that cask.
Thank you.
Way to rub it in, Lou.
Yeah,
that's the best one, Liz. It's so head and shoulders above the other two. It's
we'll have to get you a replacement, Liz.
Thank you.
I'm sure she can smell it in her suitcase.
Yes. Does the note travel through the laundry?
Yeah, I won't wash that article of clothing. I'll keep it saturated. So. Lou, on cue there, I saw you sampling, and maybe it would be a good time to pivot and talk about your lineup, and specifically the brownstone rye. Like where does that come from? That kind of terminology, and what does that mean?
We were kind of coming along with names, and one of the we had it was actually inspired by our trip to Ireland. It's a fishing village on the west coast of Ireland. It's called Brownstone, and and we felt like in some ways the rye was so much more accessible and less spicy. In some ways, we felt like it was almost a little bit Irish in the way that it was approaching whiskey. And so we kind of thought, we'd like the name. It was alliterative. Nobody else had it. Wow. So it's like, this is a nice name. So it's kind of that became our kind of flagship brand, was the Brownstone rye.
And it does sound not primitive, but rural. Roundstone just sounds kind of
Yeah. It's it's just kind of I just liked it because it was like it had a nice name, but it wasn't specific to any one thing.
No. So the one thing I did want to ask with the three whiskey, I'm sorry, Liz, go ahead.
No, I was
I
just
cut
my
you off.
comment
I don't
there.
want to do that anymore. I don't. I do it too much, and I apologize.
And I'll apologize with the background noise. We're bunging barrels. So
She's got bunging going on over there.
That's why I had to come home, because otherwise you'd hear beep from forklifts. So
right, yeah, true life here.
Yes.
So Roundstone, when I saw it initially, it made me think of stone milling. And
that's a cool way to think about it. Yeah. Yeah, kind of like a grist. But that wasn't what we were thinking of.
Yeah, I thought of roundstones in a stream.
Yeah, it was really like a tumbled
rounded
stone. Yeah, it was by the fishing village.
It's definitely evocative.
Yeah, it's got a nice name.
So we've got you sent us three expressions: the 80 proof, the distiller's edition.
Yeah, 92 proof. Yep,
and then the cask. What's the aim of those three different expressions?
It's interesting because we started, like I said, and initially the ABC in Virginia took on our Roundstone, and it was the 80 proof, and that was our first our first expression. And so we were going along with that, and I can't remember exactly when, but it was probably in 2012 or so that we had a lot of folks in DC, especially in bartenders, wanted something with a little more octane to it. And so we thought, you know what, we'll do this as a separate expression, and you know what, probably people love it so much that they'll just stop buying the 80 proof and we can just kind of let it fall away. And that wasn't what happened. Especially in Virginia, they buy the heck out of the 80 proof.
Oh, okay.
There is we're in a control state, and in Virginia, pricing is much higher than it is most other places. So, yes.
Know all about
Philadelphia or Pennsylvania, yes, exactly. Similar. But we probably right now, most of our product is the 80 proof, but outside of Virginia, specifically in our home market, we are moving more and more of the 92 proof as we get into other states. And then the cask proof was just like, these are barrels that when you go in them, you just don't want to mess with it. And we just want to keep those at that, what they come out of the cask at. Those are just kind of like, that's more like the flavor text, if you will. That's like it's so pretty, I just didn't want to bother it. But the 92 are barrels that we looked at, and we found, that when that was where these really gorgeous notes show up best. And it's not every single barrel. Some barrels show up best at 80 proof, some show up best at cask, but some barrels show up their best side at 92. They might have these plum notes or citrus notes that kind of come out and are just, they really sing. And so that's kind of what we start doing, is we started to just look at, okay, we're going to take all these barrel samples and find out what do they want to be, start testing them at the different proofs and see where they fell out. And so it kind of came to be that was our trifecta of ryes, if you will, especially since the Rebel Rouser is still a very small product. We don't have enough of it yet to make it a full-time feature. So, and
the difference on the Rebel Rouser is
that's bottled in bond. So that's 4 years. These other ones are closer to 2. Right around 2 years old, and 30-gallon barrels. The Rebel Rouser is still in 30-gallon barrels. It is now, I think I have one more year of releases from 30-gallon barrels, but then we're going to move to larger barrels coming out. So it's probably a couple years out, though, because I want them to have a little more time in the barrel as they go to the bigger barrels.
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Liz, seriously, not rubbing things in, but the testing really does. the cast strength really does express itself differently. It's striking.
It's got a lot of texture to it. I think
Yeah.
that's what really hits for me is the texture. Those
Mouthfeel.
barrels. Yeah, it's mouthfeel.
Mhm.
It's velvety. It's got viscosity on the tongue. It's
and the flavor is
I'll definitely send you some.
kind of is richer as well. It's just, it really does come off different. And the first two are, I think, more clearly the same thing, but a little bit. But this one is like a whole different cat. It's nice. I mean, and that was why I wanted to ask you what the aim was, and I suffered over the wording of that. I'm like, what's the point of having 3?
What's
okay,
the
that's
point?
not a good way to do it. What were you thinking? No, that's not good. What's the aim? That's good. We'll go with that.
I like to think of the 80 proof as like a front porch sipper.
Yeah.
It's an easy drinking rye. It's not working too hard. It's got some nice rye flavor, but it's approachable especially for people who don't know if they like rye. I mean, you go and get introduced to rye, and sometimes your first rye might be a Rittenhouse or something that has a lot of punch, and you're like, I don't know, this is not my friend. But it's just because, rye is more diverse than what people automatically think of. And so I like having something that when I have people who come into our tasting room or people at tastings and they say, oh, I don't know, I like bourbon. And I'm like, you should try this because I think you will find that this is a really nice, approachable whiskey more, for a bourbon drinker.
I have to say, now that you've told us about the Irish connection, I can't help thinking, oh yeah, it's approachable, like an Irish whiskey.
Like an Irish whiskey, right? It's something that is easy drinking. Yeah, and a lot of people, it's funny because I do tastings, I get a lot of people who are just like, I just that the other ones are too strong for me. I'd like it to be, much easier drinking, and so I think that's probably kind of one of the reasons why it stays perennially popular is that for a lot of people, they don't necessarily see a big reward for their enjoyment in buying a higher proof whiskey. Now, granted, there are lots of people who do. They're all about the proof. And, I could travel both ways on that. I really can appreciate a high proof, but there are lots of days when it's just nice to have something to sip on and it's not,
I see that in the Facebook whiskey groups all the time anymore. They just don't have any time at all for an 80 proof whiskey.
Yeah. And it's funny because, so many of even the most really, really well-respected and beautiful whiskeys in the world are 80 proof. And it's like, I really don't get why.
Don't get it.
Yeah.
Don't get it.
I'm like, but that's okay. I think
Most of ours
sometimes.
Hi.
Know your market.
48% and 50%. That's most of our product offerings. But that being said, again, like just because I have a frame of reference with our whiskeys, and we're more on the bolder, punchier, spicier side, and this is a very interesting juxtaposition because this is definitely on that more caramel, sweeter, softer.
Yeah.
Softer. And again, it just speaks to.
And when you're talking about, Canadian and Vermont rye, it's a different climate. There's going to be different kinds of agriculture that flourish up there, and it's going to do different things to your final product.
Well, the thing that's getting me is that caramel sweetness you're talking about. I mean, I shouldn't say every. I'm generalizing like crazy. A number of people will tell you that if a rye is sweet, it's because it's a Kentucky rye and it's got too much corn in it.
Yeah, and mine has no corn. It
doesn't have to be that way.
No. It can be more fun.
What's that?
Mythbuster.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, it doesn't have to have any corn in it, and it can still be caramelly, and it can have these nice fruity notes. It doesn't have to be all spice and and dill notes and all these other things. It can be totally different.
So how do you control for that? How do you build that?
I think that's just, essentially it's when you look at what your process is and you build a process and you build it consistently and you, when I get a new rye in or something, do a single taste through it and then see what it does. And if I bring something new in, I bring it in at a very low amount in my rye mix, like I said, my mash bill of rye, I'll start it very small just to make sure that I'm not changing anything drastically. Since I'm not taking, multiple barrels and building a blend for consistency, what I do instead is I create my process for consistency so that, outside of barrel variation, there isn't a tremendous amount of variation. And so the barrel is really kind of what separates everything into its different lane. And that's what you get when you come out of doing, polystyrene foam and making contact lenses is you learn about how do I run a process completely consistently and reproducibly, and how do you build for that?
So speaking of barrels, toast and char is all the same between your bottle and bond and the offerings that we.
Yep, I'm middle of the road. I like a 3 char or 2.5. Sometimes if it's got a 5 scale, I go, give me a 2.5, a 3 char if it's, but I like medium. I don't want it too much. I don't want it too little. And that seems to kind of give me the right thing that I'm looking for. We use 30s. When I started in 2009, 2010, I was the only person there. Some people I see them move those 53s, but I am not that young. And so I move 30s. I can do that. I can flip them. I can move them up and down and do whatever I need to with them. But I could not handle a full 53 and feel safe. So we kind of stuck with 30s. And that's what we do all of our current Roundstone products with. Like I said, the Rabble has switched to 53s, but we won't be seeing that product coming out yet for a year or two. Just because of the time. The 30s were brutal for a bottled in bond whiskey. Ooh, yeah. Losing a third of it, it's just depressing as hell.
Sorry to laugh, but yeah.
It is. Yeah. You flip it and it swishes inside and you're like, oh, damn.
I don't want to breathe my product. I want to sell it.
Yes, exactly.
Liz, is that a... Yeah, there it is.
So I had another question. There was technically a question in the chat from Jose, but he was just saying hi from Venezuela. So hi, Jose.
Hey, Jose.
Thanks for joining. One thing when I was kind of looking at your website that jumped out at me was your kind of moniker of solar powered spirits. And I think sustainability certainly is a huge topic area and something that I know, us distillers are really trying to think critically about, and how we can be, stewards of the land and work more sustainably. So wanted to see what you guys are working on.
Yeah, well, when we started, we were in a flex warehouse space. So those are like, you got a electrician, car repair, and local distillery all in a row. And you got a garage door and a little tiny office. That was where we started. But when we got our current home, which is about 6,000 square feet on Main Street, it used to be a Buick dealership back in 1921 when the building was built.
Wow.
And so it has, it's about 20 some feet ceilings in the front of the building, and it slopes back to about an 8-foot ceiling in the rear. And it just happens to be sloping in the right direction so that when you put solar panels all over the roof, they're at almost exactly the perfect angle. Awesome. So we went ahead and rolled that project into the construction loan that we got to refurbish the building because it had been it had not seen a lot of love probably in since 1920 something, and it like we had masons working on it, for just pointing up and getting everything back. So we kind of rolled that in and we're able to get that. So at one point, I think there is we have a lot of data centers where we are out in Loudoun County. But originally we had the largest solar array, probably in even 2015, I think we still had the largest solar array in Loudoun. But then since then, a couple of those really big places have gotten some solar arrays that are bigger. But that actually we got our, there were months in and especially before we got our current still, when we first started, we only had a electric still. And even when we were running that, we had an electric mash tank too. And when we were using those, we still had a $200 power bill, for a month. That was like nothing, you know. It's nothing. So it definitely paid back. It's just that you have to be able to put that into something where you can finance it in a reasonable way, but it definitely makes sense. Yeah. And then, when we did a production upgrade over the past year, we also finally were able to, fold glycol into the system. So that was nice. So it was dark in Liz. Did the power go out? Oh no. I had power going down, Liz. Oh dear.
Wow.
I can't make this up. I'm sorry. This is what working at a distillery is like.
That's
it
amazing.
is. Except
so you're
she
running
didn't
on battery
swear.
power now.
Except I didn't swear. Well,
yeah.
I did go on mute for a brief second.
At least you have the high vis vest on.
I know. So we know she's there.
Exactly, because it is pitch black.
Wow. Can't make it up.
Oh man,
Yeah.
it's a fun business.
If I could, let's get away from distilleries for a second. Let's talk about the ACSA angle, if you could.
Yes.
I mean, you are. There she is.
Oh, look, I love it. You're scrappy, Liz.
She doesn't let it get her down. Never does.
Nope, that's it. That's a scrappy mindset that we run into in craft distillers. We make it work, damn it.
So you're kind of almost, well, not uniquely positioned, but I mean, you're right there. You're sitting at I don't want to say at the top of the pyramid. Nobody really is.
Yeah.
But you do get to see a lot more than most people do, and your eyes are up looking at the big view more because of the ACSA. What's up with the industry? The industry still growing?
Is
it?
It has been crazy. The past 2 years when I started and took over from Chris Montana, who was the immediate past president. He called me. I think it was we were all just finishing, like our company had just wrapped up the sanitizer thing. We had been eating out every day, meetings, trying to deal with FDA and all the issues that sanitizer brought with it. And Chris gave me a call and said, we're not going to, we were supposed to have a conference and I was going to be taking over as president. He said, you're going to have to just take it over as it is. And I was like, oh Lord, here we go. And he's like, this wasn't exactly, I was going to tell you that, well, it isn't too bad being president, you do this and they've mostly got it handled. He's like, I can't say that anymore, but here you go.
See ya.
Yep. It was like, peace out. And it was, it was a real time challenge. And I mean, for the association, the stuff we were figuring out as an association, all the ways that you raise money as a nonprofit trade association, which are your conferences and all these things, you can't do it. So you're figuring out, how do you navigate that? And how do I support employees that we have as an association? And then at the same time, you're looking at how do we, help our members who were struggling? How do we help them find out what kinds of aid is available to them? How do we help them advocate for things like cocktails to go, direct to consumer shipping? And, you know, it was crazy because when in Virginia, we were given direct ship to our customers within the state pretty quickly as an emergency measure. And, you know, people who had been working on this as a topic for years were shocked because it never seemed like there was going to be any headway. And yet, because of the pandemic, all these emergency measures went through. Now, the challenge, of course, is how do you make that permanent? And, you know, there is a huge amount of opposition in the middle tier. Some retailers are more opposed than others, but, you know, our wholesale partners are very opposed. They think this is going to hurt them. You know, it's not going to hurt you. You know, my own look at what happened in Virginia is my own sales, even though I went direct to consumer, it was like, I found that what we saw was that we may have been able to make our sales for that year in our tasting room go up by 80% because we really started focusing on how do we connect with our customers and get them to place orders with us. At that same time, we saw sales in our state stores go up 30-some%, which is just as much as the big legacy brands that were really seeing the boom.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's really that direct to consumer is a marketing technique. And it is something that small distilleries who don't get shelf space easily are the ones that can really, that's my dog shaking down there, are the ones that can, you know, leverage this. And it provides a way for people who love niche original spirits, things that don't get shelf space. I'm sorry, you don't see much shelf space for peach brandy. That, you know, all these really small legacy kind of projects, those things can be sustained. And I feel like I'm always, you know, reading articles that are written by you, Lou, about somebody's great new whiskey. I can't get it. It's not coming to Virginia.
Right.
How, you know, why can't it's silly.
Yeah.
And our customers don't understand why not. We don't necessarily understand why not, but it's going to be the next kind of big, hairy goal that we have. You know, we got federal excise tax for small producers decreased. It took 10 years, but it happened.
That was a big one. Yeah.
You have to take a long view. And so my belief is that that's really kind of the next frontier for us is, okay, how do we make those kind of projects something that can support members and work with their state associations, help support them, and, you know, kind of try to guide the way. If it ends up, you know, basically when you look at wine, they ticked away at it. And at some point the Granholm decision came, and, you know, we don't necessarily want to be in that position, but we're hoping that we can kind of start helping guide people toward things that are compliant with that decision so that things can start moving more freely among the states.
Yeah.
And I just really am excited to still be a part of the leadership there. I love advocacy. I think that that's really kind of something I get really passionate about too, is kind of giving people the tools they need and encouraging them to talk to their, you know, state legislators, you know, kind of keep out there banging the drum, because, you know, most of our members don't have money for big donations.
Sure.
Well, then you better have a story, and you better repeat that story and tell it to your customers, and, you know, kind of keep working away at it. And as people grow, you know, and more people get involved in the industry, I think it's inevitable. It will happen, especially as consolidation in the middle tier continues.
Yeah.
And it's just getting more. And, you know, one of the things we were talking about is that, you know, you get to a level where I talk to small producers all the time who are really frustrated. For them, it's about being denied access to the market. And if they can't get distributors to return their phone calls and help move their product, everybody wants distribution. Nobody wants to be, you know,
oh yeah, just
because it's the weight of volume.
Yeah.
It's the way to retail. Retail is the way to volume, and you need a distribution partner. But if you can't prove that you can sell those numbers, then distributors don't want to talk to you. And like I said, for niche products, like if you're making really beautiful heritage spirits that don't fit into a major wall kind of category, then you're always going to be in trouble.
Yeah.
And I think that, if we want our spirit heritage for those niche kind of things to continue, as consumers, we need to push for the availability of it so that we can keep them alive by ordering it. But that's my soapbox.
Yeah, no, great. That's awesome.
Yeah.
We're getting close to end of the hour. I did want to get in some talk with the Step Up Foundation. Can we talk about that? That's the ACSA's initiative for diversity in the industry. What I found interesting and what I wanted to ask you about, in your bio that you sent us, you noted that it's about combating the lack of diversity in the spirits industry, but you mentioned it's not just in the people working in the industry, it's the customers. Yeah. So and you have to look at both angles on this. And I thought that was an interesting perspective. But sorry, I just wanted to.
No, absolutely. I think that when you look at appealing to underrepresented people, either on the as customers, it's about connecting them with flavors and making more interesting things available that appeal to all demographics, right? Whether it's, people who want, I want, this kind of thing that, you look at, say, Sorrel liqueur, for instance, right? Hibiscus flavors. And that's an amazing product. And it's wonderful that he's brought that back, and, that Jack from Brooklyn has kind of resurrected this and made it into this great thing. And that, that Fawn Weaver from Uncle Nearest and the Nearest and Jack Foundation have kind of helped do that. One of the things we saw in ACSA was we saw that effort going on, and we were like, that's amazing. They're focused on leadership and what they can do for at the top of the hierarchy, if you will. What we saw was that, folks, why shouldn't it be across the gamut? So you should have people be able to come in, but not necessarily needing to come in and just being in a position where they would be stuck on the bottling line. Let's say you can come in on the ground floor, you can work my bottling line, and then, you got 4 or 5 people. But, some of the inequities that happen because, people that maybe look like me will get promoted before somebody that's African American or something else, because it's more middle of the road, comparable to what most of the ownership looks like. And so what we felt like was that if we could give people a real grounding and in the whole of the kinds of things they need to know, that they wouldn't need to come in at the point where they can get stuck. They would already be a person with a full year of experience and have a thorough grounding in everything from selecting ingredients to mashing to fermentation to distillation to warehousing and barreling and blending, and give them also. So that is going to be 8 to 12 weeks spent in multiple distilleries. So we wanted diverse distilleries too. We wanted a distillery that might be farm to glass as opposed to just grain to glass, just farm to glass. They're farming it. So go see how that works. How does that work? How does the business of that work? How do they market it? How do they do a tasting room? Some of these folks might be entrepreneurial. They may want to start their own distillery. Give them mentorship, give them connections so that then they have the ability to find access to capital if they want to start their own business. If they want to become a blender and they've come from a non-traditional background, one of our interns this year, Erin Lee, is a tea sommelier. She's only recently got involved in spirits, and she has an incredible palate and nose for tea. And she really wanted to learn about spirits, but she couldn't find a way in. And so she has spent the last 8 to 12 weeks working at Westward and seeing how their processes are. She's done their whole thing. Next, she's going to be going to Eight Oaks Farm Distillery in Pennsylvania.
God, that's
You
right up
might
here.
even know them, Lou.
Yeah,
Chad
I do.
and crew. And Yaki Odomo, who is our other intern, he's just finishing up at Eight Oaks, and he's going to be going out to Westward. And then later they're planning to go to Cascade Hollow and spend some time at that distillery and really see how do the large operations go. Then they're going to spend some time at RNDC and learn how does distribution work and really get a grasp, because if you're going to get into the spirits business and you don't understand distribution, you're going to be at a real disadvantage. So we felt like if somebody goes through and learns all that, they are going to come out and they're going to just be in such a strong position for whatever they want to start with. Plus, we match them with mentors who can help them kind of navigate. And they're going to then stay on every year and connect with subsequent years interns so that there's a cohort of underrepresented folks who are all looking out for each other. I mean, it happens kind of informally among a lot of the women in this industry. You know, if you know somebody, they're looking for a woman for this, and you know somebody who might be looking for work, you'll pass that along. That's what we want to happen for these other folks, to create a network. And so we're really excited. You know, Diageo came on early as our founding cornerstone partner. So they have helped us, you know, kind of get that big infusion to kind of launch it, because we've actually found that almost running the internship is ending up almost twice as much as we'd budgeted, because everything is so expensive now, from renting cars for these folks to housing for these folks. Everything has just gone through the roof. And so, you know, finding those partners, Bacardi has come on as a real partner for us too, like sponsoring basically a whole intern. And so we're reaching out and trying to get more folks involved in this, because we feel like that's going to bring, and what I think is what's really cool about it is you get then more products like, if you will, Sorel, something that comes from somebody's heritage that we may not be familiar with, but once we get it, we're like, wow, this is amazing. I want more of that. And so I think that it's going to ultimately bring more exciting products to our shelves. And I think that's a big win for everybody, not to mention that it'll bring more people to the category. And I think, you know, the stories will change, and you know, whiskey as well as everything else is about stories for us.
I think that's what brought whiskey back. I still think.
I do
People
too.
want to hear stories, and we have a great one.
Yeah.
I unfortunately, that's all we have time to tell this show. We didn't have any. Did we have questions, Liz? Or was that it?
We did not have any additional questions.
You guys obviously did such a good job of asking all the ones people had.
Honestly, I always think that's the better shows don't have any questions, because they're just listening.
Hooked.
So
just hooked.
Yeah, hooked, and we covered it all. So thank you very much.
Actually, one more question, but we don't even have time to answer it. So I'll have to connect with you at one of these, you know, fabulous events that we can network.
Yes, lovely.
And Becky, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Lou. Thank you, Liz. It was a real pleasure.
I was really glad you could make it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next show.
Yeah, looking ahead in 2 weeks for our next show.
As we do now. Go ahead.
We have Nick Nagel of Whiskey Acres. So we'll be talking.
Speaking of farm to glass.
Yep.
Yeah.
Seed to sip. As I like to say. So come back and join us for that conversation in 2 weeks. But until then, I will attempt to raise a glass and thanks again for everyone
Good
joining
luck on the power.
Yeah.
I hope your power comes back.
I'm going to find out in a few minutes.
Good to see you, Liz. Nice to see you, Becky. Take care,
Thank
everybody.
you, guys.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Cheers.